Lots of civil rights issues in the hopper tonight.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Welcome in. So the Supreme Court is busy this week in handing down decisions that are pretty provocative. And I'll tell you, it feels like a broken record on 5-4 votes here. We have a philosophical divide, and if anybody has a question as to why presidential elections are important, Supreme Court nominations are very, very important. Good to have you in. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to forego the usual here's what's going on because we've got so many things in the hopper here that I think our guest will want to take a piece of, that I'm just going to jump into it. Although this decision just came down, and Steve Brown from the American Civil Liberties Union hasn't had a chance really to review this, but it's somewhat self-explanatory. So let's put this headline up. The unions, as we record our programs each early afternoon, and the local union organizations were getting together late this afternoon, like 4 o'clock, to do a press briefing as to what their take is on the Supreme Court decision, which is considered a blow to labor unions. They're just going to have to regroup. I mean, basically what it says is if I'm a union member, or if I'm working in employment that's covered by the union and I don't want to pay the dues, I have a First Amendment right to say I don't want to pay the dues. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I mean, listen, this just happened, so I actually didn't invite you in for this one, but since it just happened for us today, you have a take on this?
The ACLU did file a brief in the case. As you noted, I have not had a chance to actually read the opinion. The ACLU did support the labor unions in this case. And, you know, it's really important to emphasize what was involved here.
Sure.
The court ruled over 40 years ago was a precedent they overturned in this decision, overturning precedent that conservative justices say they don't like to do is something they did. But the court made what I think was a very appropriate and logical distinction 40 years ago about how to deal with the legitimate issue of employees not being forced to pay a union to be involved in political campaigns that they disagree with. So the court came to this sort of middle ground and said, an individual employee has the right not to pay for that sort of, for funding those sorts of activities. At the same time, the union has a broader purpose of representing everybody in the workplace, and those sorts of collective bargaining roles that they play. It is appropriate for everybody to pay for that part of the union's work. Because they're benefiting from whatever the union gets from a contract or whatever. So that was the difference. If they spent money on political activities, you were able to ask for money back, but there was a core amount of money that went to collective bargaining agreements. What the Supreme Court has said today is that's not even good enough. Employees have the right not to pay anything to their unions, even for the stuff they're doing that is purely work-related, and benefiting you as an employee. And, you know, it really is a significant blow to labor unions. What it's saying is you have no right to have the people you're representing pay you to do the job a union is supposed to do.
Well, there'll be two interesting manifestations, I think, that will come from this. And that is, and I haven't had a chance to dig deep in. I wonder what your instinct is on this. Again, you haven't briefed yourself. But will a union, say like the NEA, who is the designated exclusive bargaining agent for teachers, or well, the AFT and the NEA each have their jurisdictional exclusivity, right? Teachers who say, I don't want to pay the union dues, is there a chance they'll be extricated from the union benefits?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. You know, I'm not familiar enough with labor law. I mean, there are obligations under federal labor law for unions to represent their employees when issues crop up. Whether they can somehow bifurcate it in light of this decision, I just don't know the answer.
The other thing that I think is going to be fascinating about this is that I believe that the union position is going to be, and the decision allows for, almost a la carte charging, where the union can actually a la carte charge employees who will not pay their dues for collective bargaining representation, or more specifically, for grievance representation. So it's almost a be careful what you ask for type of thing. Excuse me, a little allergy throat here going on. But the employee who says, oh, I don't want to pay the dues because I don't like their philosophy, still might have a grievance that they have to be represented for. And if they're not, represented well, they're in trouble. And so Absolutely. They may have to write a check, which prorated might be a whole lot more expensive than their dues.
That's a great question. I just don't know the answer. But I'm sure everybody is trying to figure out exactly what it is unions are in a position to do now in light of this decision, what they can't do.
I did hear Bob Walsh from the NEA on the radio on the Matt Allen show on WPRO today, infer that that's what they believe could happen. But one of the things I think the union is going to have to regroup, unions in general are going to have to regroup with in this, is to market themselves better to the membership. And to make it really clear to membership why it's so important for them to be represented, and maybe it creates a little bit more dialogue than maybe some union members think that they've been accessible to.
I think you're right. They are going to have to do that. There's no question about that.
All right, so that's issue number one off the table. I don't know. This just came up. Sorry to present allergies on the television, but what are you going to do? The next issue that we have here is the travel ban. Here's the headline, and here's the latest on it.
By a vote of 5-4, on Tuesday, the Supreme Court upheld President Trump's travel ban in place since December. It applies to people from 5 countries with overwhelmingly Muslim populations: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. It also affects North Korea and some Venezuelan residents. Judges on the East and West Coasts have argued the policy was a form of religious discrimination. But the nation's highest court said the travel order is squarely within the scope of presidential authority. Muslims are welcome here. Yesterday, demonstrators gathered across the country to protest the decision, and politicians on both sides of the aisle spoke out.
Federal immigration law explicitly gives the president the authority to make determinations in the national interest to keep us safe.
Make no mistake, the Supreme Court has endorsed bigotry and Islamophobia. That's what they did.
President Trump has said the policy is in place to keep Islamic extremists out. After the ruling, he tweeted, "Wow."
Yeah, because he didn't think he was going to win it, I guess, or I don't know. Did you go, wow? What do you think?
I think it's a very shocking and shameful decision. I think history will not treat this decision kindly. The majority of the Supreme Court went out of its way to essentially ignore all the evidence that was there that this was a religious-based order by the president.
But when you say that, people go, "Oh, come on." In fact, they excluded from their consideration things Donald Trump said outside the specifics of what paperwork was presented to them in the arguments.
Well, no, all that information was, they had that information in front of them.
But they excluded it from their consideration.
Said it wasn't relevant. That's
okay,
right. And it's directly relevant. President Trump made it clear before he was elected and after he was elected that he was going to do what he could to keep Muslims from entering this country. And the Supreme Court's decision is really just disingenuous in ignoring all that, pretending it didn't happen in order to uphold this ban. And as I said, it really is shocking to have the Supreme Court do this. One of the big cases that was cited by both the majority and dissent was the Korematsu case, which you may have heard about. This was the Japanese. This was back in the 1940s when the Supreme Court, in another very shameful decision, by a 6-3 vote at the time, said it was perfectly okay to take Japanese Americans and put them in internment camps for the course of World War II.
The argument was security.
The arguments were exactly the same as were made in this case.
Right.
They were also based on as flimsy evidence as was presented in this case about a national security concern. Unfortunately, it took decades before everybody acknowledged what a terrible decision it was. Everybody now acknowledges it. The majority of the Supreme Court has now acknowledged it, but it's not great to 60 years, 70 years later, to say, oh, we know we made a mistake, and then make the same mistake
well,
again.
it's really interesting. The Korematsu case is fascinating in the sense that the government actually alleged that the military had made a determination that Japanese Americans presented a security risk. And there really wasn't any documentation for that. There was a great 1980s, what's the name of the professor that?
Peter Irons?
Yes, Peter Irons, who actually had the courage to actually investigate this thing so deep to find out that there really was no legitimacy to the claim that the Army felt that there was a security risk. Justice Roberts, in his opinion, supporting the travel ban, actually cited the Korematsu case, saying that we can't repeat the Korematsu case, meaning that we can't target people for their ethnicity and who they are, if I understood what he was saying. At the same time, the Supreme Court has long had a tradition of trying to stay away from the executive branch's determinations about security. And security is, for lack of a better term, the Supreme Court alibi here.
I think that's an excellent way of putting it. And also, it's worth noting that a lot of the security, quote-unquote, concerns were not presented to the court on the grounds that they were secret, which is the same thing that happened in the Korematsu case, where the government said, we can't present you all the evidence we have, when there really was no evidence, but they cited national security, and that's exactly, it's the same thing going on here. It's really repeating the past. Despite Chief Justice Roberts' attempts to say no, this has nothing to do with
Well, look,
Korematsu.
it really has a lot to do. You're really going to have to pay attention to the next election and the next election and the next election. As I said on the television right here yesterday when the decision came down, the Supreme Court more or less said, hey, listen, this is about security, and if it happens to be a bigot that's making decisions on security, well, oh well. And that really kind of... I hate to tell you, folks, you're going to have to determine whether or not you like the philosophy and the humanitarian disposition of those who you elect, because it's kind of their purview. As the Supreme Court is saying, listen, you are who you elected, and you get what you elect in some ways.
Well, that is what the majority of the Supreme Court said. I certainly think there were very strong arguments why the court should not simply abide by that notion. If anything, just by learning what happened in Korematsu should be something to make everybody wary about making the same mistakes, relying on the same errors.
All right, we've got a couple other decisions and current conditions. Immigration, big deal. Kristen's law, too. Stay with us.
So we're keeping families together, and this will solve that problem.
Yeah, well, I don't know what problem he thinks he solved. I mean, he's got 2,300 some odd families from the first wave of 2018 immigration separation that are that there's no plan for putting together. You've got activity on the border that doesn't actually match up with the philosophies. You got an attorney general who said in March we're gonna separate families, and then go on the Christian Broadcast Network last week and say that was never our intent. And then last night he's busting horns. Going back. It's amazing how the administration in totality is affected by its leader.
Yeah.
Like the behavior kind of repeats itself. But the specific ACLU evaluation of the current immigration border crises is what?
It's a nightmare. It is incredibly cruel and inhumane. What a country that supposedly values fundamental liberties is doing. I mean, they are literally taking little children from their parents, sending them 1,000 miles away, and then not even keeping track. A decision was issued just yesterday. A judge issued a decision in, I think, Washington State, rejecting this policy of separating families, and the judge said that the government does a better job of keeping track of its property than it is of these kids. Parents don't even know where their kids are. The government apparently a lot of the times at this point doesn't know where they are. It's horrific. And yet you have an administration that doesn't really seem to care that this is what's happening.
The data of border crossing and immigrants who are coming in here illegally is so significantly lower.
And it's been going lower for years.
10 years. It has been going down for 10 years and decelerated significantly during the Obama years.
Yes, that's right.
And so there's this, and I'll tell you, I used to ask, there'd be polling data. So say call it 2015, polling data. On the list of things that you're really concerned about, where does immigration fall? Out of 10, it fell 7th, 8th.
Mm-hmm.
But this president has made it surge, and it's almost like there's a community of people in this country that are saying, oh yeah, I really hate this, as opposed to having an intrinsic problem with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really crazy. I don't know where we're going to go. Just, can I jump a headline on the second page there? This just happened. Mass ICE agents to reinstate in-office arrests. You know, we had this local case of this young woman who was, you know, ripped from her family after she went in thinking she was just kind of putting the finishing touches on a long-term deal to stay here with her husband, just kind of moseying along, going through what? Bureaucratic red tape. Yep. And she was taken. That case had a lot of high profile, and Ms. Calderon there. But that case, what, has informed ICE now and the administration? Tell me.
Yeah, so just to give brief background for those who don't recall, Lillian Calderon has been in this country since she was 3 years old. She's married to a U.S. citizen. She has two young U.S. citizen kids. And she was working through a process that the federal government has for individuals in her position to be able to get a green card by being married to a U.S. citizen because of the length of time she's been here. So she went to a green card interview in Johnston, where the office is, and presented all the evidence to prove that this was a bona fide marriage, that it wasn't a sham, in order to, you know, be here legally. Have 2 kids, and have been together for a long time. And after the interview, the person interviewing says, yes, all this evidence shows it's a bona fide marriage. I'm going to indicate that. And then before she walks out the door, a couple of ICE agents come in and arrest her and take her to a detention facility where she's held for a month until we're able to go into court and get her out. What happened as a result is the judge has issued an order for her saying that ICE cannot do anything to her while this case is pending. In the meantime, the suit has been turned into a class action lawsuit challenging the government's position that they can do this, that they have the right to arrest and detain people like Ms. Calderon when they're going through the very process that the government says they should do in order to correct their status.
So where did we turn the page where mass ICE agents say, hey, listen, we're going to start doing this more and more?
Yeah. Well, after the suit was filed and after the judge issued his order on behalf of Ms. Calderon, the field office director for the Boston ICE office provided an affidavit saying, we are no longer going to do this. The only time we will arrest somebody who's going through this lawful process of changing their status is if we believe there's a serious danger to public safety. And that what happened is that person left, a new person came in the last few weeks.
Fired or retired?
I don't know. I don't know the background. And so a document was filed in court this past Friday, indicating there's this new person who's now a defendant in the suit. And by the way, this is to let you know we're no longer abiding by the policy that the previous director had. Nobody should feel that they confident that they will not be arrested and going for these interviews.
This is only going to chase people out of the system.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Instead of accountability, there'll be no accountability.
That's right, and you're doing it with people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's the worst part.
Many of whom are working, paying taxes.
Absolutely, and have been here for years, have stable families, and to see ICE performing this bait and switch, you know, come on down, you know,
you
get
got a 10 o'clock appointment, we'll run you
status.
through the system, and by the way, you're under arrest.
Yeah, it's shocking. It really is.
Kristen's Law, a quick kick on that. The ACLU had a position on it, and there's a kind of a compromise that occurred. I'm not so sure it's so smart. Stay with us.
This isn't intended to go after the drug sharer or the drug user, but to go after the person who's selling the drugs.
This is the second bill offered by the Attorney General, whose solution to this crisis seems to be to incarcerate all of those affected by it.
Kristen's Law, it's about if I sell bad drugs to Steve and Steve croaks, I could get life in prison. The original version from the Attorney General's office mandated that I got life in prison. The governor's signatures, you know, going on the modified version, which is judge could decide to send me to life for prison, to prison for life. We had some very, very smart medical experts here last week to talk to us about the reality on the ground, how this actually conflicts with Samaritan law, which in the Samaritan law is if I'm hanging around with Steve and I'm shooting up and he's shooting up and he's going down for the count, I can call the authorities and not worry about being arrested. But if you buy the farm, all bets are off. So now, why would I call, right? And
yes. It's, there's no question that it does undermine the Good Samaritan law. Who is going to take the chance of up to life in prison simply for picking up the phone to help somebody? And the fact that they even have to think about whether to call is itself a deterrent to calling. This is, you know, one of these...
It's a revenge law, is what it is.
It is. You know, I certainly understand the pain that the parents feel for what happened, but this is not going to get at the people everybody says it's supposed to get at. They keep on talking about the drug kingpins who are doing this. It's not the drug kingpins who are going to get arrested. As you say, it's going to be you and me, you know, the two friends, family members, hanging around, both with addictions. They're the ones who are going to get charged under this law, and
there are many states.
Die.
There are many states that have versions of this law. It's almost as if the Attorney General is just trying to keep up with the Joneses. And there's just so much evidence out there now that the law really doesn't do what it's intended to do.
Absolutely, and if you heard from the medical professionals, I mean, it was amazing the uniformity among people in the medical profession, in the recovery community, all saying this is a terrible idea, it will not help, it will hurt, it will harm people, and yet it all went for naught.
We only have a minute. What's your take on this case and/or in general, the growing divide that I see between people who know what's happening in society on the ground and those who legislate? I mean, there's a big space, it seems to me.
There is. I'm not
sure. It
sure.
doesn't mean Steve and I have all joined forces. I joke with them. ACLU and I are like 9 out of 10 these days. It's just because the world is kind of, there's a lot of weird thinking going on right now.
There is. At the same time, I don't want to, it's not totally new. I think there's always been some gap between professionals and legislators. Legislators have a lot of things to consider in deciding whether to support or oppose a bill. Some of it is not necessarily based on logic. It has gotten a lot worse. I mean, at the federal level, the whole attack on science that we're seeing, I think, is an example of what's going on.
All right, so I only have a few seconds. I guess it's going to remain busy at the ACLU office.
I'm afraid it will remain very busy. It's one thing after another. But a lot of people are getting harmed every day.
Appreciate your perspective. Final word and we come back, Stevens. All right, the wheels of justice are turning in very, very strange ways these days. Charlie Fogarty is retiring, former lieutenant governor, bureaucrat. He's probably got quite the perspective on state government, and he'll join us on the Thursday program tomorrow. We'll join you, I hope, on the radio at 3 until 6 on WPRO. Have a great evening. Thanks for watching.